Every morning, he cleaned the floors of an empire that belonged to him, though not a single soul knew his name. They called him replaceable. They called him nobody. They had no idea the signature on their own building's deed was his. One phone call could have ended it all in an instant, but he chose silence, because some truths are worth more when the world discovers them on its own. Behind the tired eyes of a father who mopped floors for minimum wage was the man who had built the entire company from nothing. They fired a janitor. They were about to meet their chairman, and the board that thought they held all the power was about to...
Nobody in the building knew his real name. To the executives who rode the elevator past him every morning, he was just the quiet man in the gray uniform who emptied the trash bins and mopped the marble floors before the sun came up. If you enjoy stories about quiet strength winning in the end, stay until the final minute of this video, because what happens to this man will remind you why patience is the sharpest weapon a good man can carry. And if it moves you, tap like and subscribe, because stories like this one are just getting started. Daniel Cole had not always cleaned floors for a living. 6 years earlier, he had built Colton Dynamics from a 2-desk startup into one of the fastest-growing logistics and technology firms in the country. He had done it with his wife, Sarah, the two of them working 18-hour days out of a rented garage, living on coffee and stubborn hope. When the company finally broke through, when the contracts came pouring in and the offers to go public arrived, Daniel had structured the ownership carefully, quietly, through a holding company that bore neither his name nor his face. He never wanted the spotlight. He wanted the work to matter, and he wanted, more than anything, a life for his daughter that felt normal. Then Sarah got sick. It happened fast. A diagnosis, a hospital room, a year that blurred into machines beeping, and Daniel holding her hand through the night shifts he refused to miss, even as the company's board grew impatient with his absence from meetings. When she passed, something in Daniel went quiet in a way that never fully came back. He stepped away from the day-to-day running of Colton Dynamics, handed the operational reins to a professional executive team, and kept only one thing for himself: full ownership, hidden behind layers of paperwork that only his lawyer and one loyal accountant understood. He told himself he needed distance. He told himself his daughter, Mia, needed a father who showed up, not a name on a stock certificate. So Daniel disappeared into an ordinary life. He took a job on the facilities staff of his own company, a decision that started as a strange, almost therapeutic joke with himself, a way to walk the halls he had built without anyone treating him like something fragile or important. It would be temporary. Somehow, 3 years passed. He learned the names of every security guard, memorized which elevator stuck on the 9th floor, and pushed his cart past boardrooms where strangers now made decisions about the company he had once built with his bare hands. He raised Mia in a small 2-bedroom apartment across town, packed her lunches every morning, braided her hair badly and with great love, and never once let her know that the tower downtown, the one she pointed at from the school bus window, technically belonged to her father. The board, meanwhile, had changed. The executive team Daniel once trusted had been slowly replaced by a new chief operating officer named Victor Hale, a sharp, ambitious man who had spent 2 years quietly consolidating influence over the other board members. Victor had never met the company's true owner. As far as he knew, the mysterious holding company that controlled the majority shares was simply an absent, disengaged investor, an inheritance perhaps, or an overseas fund that never asked questions. That absence was exactly what Victor needed. He began steering contracts toward companies secretly tied to his own family, padding invoices, quietly draining resources meant for employee pensions into accounts that led back to him. He needed the culture of the company to stay exactly as it was, compliant, incurious, and unwatched. Daniel noticed things. Of course he did. A man who built a company from nothing develops an instinct for its rhythms, and even mopping floors he saw the signs. Vendors who overcharged for services no one questioned, a sudden wave of layoffs in departments that used to be profitable, whispers in the break room about missed pension contributions. He began keeping a small notebook tucked into his uniform pocket, jotting down dates and names in handwriting no one would ever suspect belonged to a chairman. He wasn't ready to act yet. He was still grieving, still learning how to be both mother and father to an 8-year-old who missed a woman she could barely remember. But he was watching. The end came on an ordinary Tuesday. Victor Hale had grown suspicious of the janitor who lingered a little too long near the executive floor, who seemed to know more about the building's server room access codes than a man in his position should. Rather than investigate quietly, Victor did what men like him always do. He moved to eliminate the inconvenience. He fabricated a story about a security breach traced to a facilities badge, claimed sensitive documents had gone missing from an unlocked office, and pushed the board, most of whom had never spoken a single word to Daniel, to approve an immediate termination. It took less than 11 minutes in that boardroom. Daniel stood by the door in his gray uniform, his cart parked in the hallway behind him, and listened as people who did not know they worked for him decided his fate. He did not argue. He did not reach for the folder of proof he could have produced in that very room, the layers of documentation that would have revealed exactly who he was and exactly what Victor Hale had been doing for 2 years. Something in him, grief, exhaustion, or perhaps a deeper patience he did not fully understand himself, told him this was not the moment. He signed the termination paperwork with a steady hand, thanked the room quietly, and walked out past the security desk where a young guard named Marcus, one of the few people who had ever treated him like he mattered, looked genuinely sorry to see him go. That night, sitting in his small kitchen with Mia already asleep down the hall, Daniel opened the folder he had kept hidden in a drawer for 3 years. Bank statements, vendor contracts, a shell company registered in Victor Hale's mother's maiden name. He had known on some level that this day might come, the day he could no longer stay invisible without letting real harm reach the hundreds of employees whose pensions were quietly being siphoned away. He thought of Sarah, of the promise he had made her in the hospital that the company they built together would never become a place that hurt people the way it had once helped them. He closed the folder, made himself a cup of coffee, and for the first time in 3 years, called his old lawyer the following 2 weeks, moved with quiet precision. Daniel did not storm back into the building. Instead, he sat with his lawyer and his accountant at a small corner booth in Rosie's diner, the same diner where he took Mia for pancakes every Saturday morning, and they built a case airtight enough that no board member could dismiss it. Forensic accounting records. Emails Victor had been careless enough to leave on a shared drive. Sworn statements from 2 junior employees who had noticed the same irregularities Daniel had and were terrified to speak up. Daniel funded a discreet audit through his holding company, the very audit Victor had been quietly blocking for over a year under the excuse of restructuring costs. On the day the audit results were finalized, Daniel asked his lawyer to schedule an emergency board meeting under the authority of Colton Holdings, the majority shareholder. The board, confused about who exactly had summoned them, gathered once again in the same obsidian-tabled room on the 40th floor, golden late-afternoon light spilling across the polished surface. Victor sat at the head of the table, smug and unaware, already rehearsing an explanation for the numbers he assumed no one outside his circle could interpret. The doors opened, and Daniel Cole walked in wearing a charcoal suit instead of a gray uniform, his silver wedding band catching the light exactly as it always had. For a long moment, no one in the room said a word. Then recognition began to dawn on a few of the older board members' faces. The ones who had, years ago, sat across from a younger Daniel in a rented garage office and shaken his hand on the company's very first contract. Marcus, the security guard, stood quietly by the door, a small, knowing smile breaking across his face for the first time all week. Daniel did not raise his voice. He simply set the folder down on the table, the same folder he had kept hidden for 3 years, and asked Victor Hale to explain, item by item, why a shell company registered to his mother's maiden name had received $400,000 in the last 18 months for consulting services no employee could describe. He asked why pension contributions had quietly dropped 11%, while executive bonuses rose by nearly the same amount. He did not need to explain who he was. The paperwork did that for him. Colton Holdings, majority owner, chairman of record since the company's founding, the same name that had signed Victor's own hiring contract 2 years earlier without Victor ever once meeting the man behind the signature. Victor tried to speak, stumbling over explanations that collapsed the moment Daniel laid the forensic report beside them. Within the hour, the board voted unanimously, this time with real understanding of what was at stake, to remove Victor Hale from his position and refer the matter to the appropriate authorities. Daniel did not ask for his old office back. He did not ask for a parade or an apology tour. He asked only that pension contributions be restored immediately, that the 2 junior employees who had quietly flagged the irregularities be protected and promoted, and that Marcus, the young guard who had never once treated the janitor with anything less than respect, be offered a permanent position in corporate security with full benefits. Word of what happened spread through the building slowly, then all at once. The story softened over time into something almost like legend among the staff. The janitor who turned out to be the chairman, the quiet man who never once used his power until it was needed to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Daniel did return to the company, though not as a ghost behind a holding company anymore. He took a modest office on the 15th floor, deliberately not the 40th, close enough to the people who did the real work every day, far enough from the throne room that had once let Victor's corruption fester unseen. He still took Mia to Rosie's diner every Saturday morning. He still braided her hair badly, still packed her lunches, still showed up to every school function even when board meetings ran late. But now, sometimes, when the school bus passed the glass tower downtown and Mia pointed out the window the way she always had, Daniel would smile and simply say that yes, he knew people who worked there, and leave it at that, because some truths are not meant to be announced. They are meant to be lived quietly, one ordinary Tuesday morning at a time, by a man who understood that real power was never about being seen. It was about being ready, patient, and unwilling to let the people who depended on him fall through the cracks of someone else's greed. And in the end, that quiet patience did more good for more people than any title ever could have.